I was halfway through washing down the deck of my boat, cold beer in hand, when I heard the shrill voice echo across the marina parking lot. "Mr. Ellis, that boat's been out for over 3 hours. You know the HOA boating hours end at 5? I turned around slowly, already knowing who it was. There she stood in her pastel pink sun hat and matching clipboard, Brenda Langford, president of our HOA and self-declared queen of the waters. She was flanked by her 2 loyal minions, both nodding like bobbleheads. I wiped my hands on a rag and gave her a look. "Brenda, the marina's not even under HOA jurisdiction. You can't make up boating hours." She scowled like I'd kicked her poodle. "As president of the Waterfront Estates HOA, I have every right to enforce community standards. Boats coming in and out after dark disrupt the peace and attract." "Riffraff? Brenda," I said, walking over to her, "this marina is privately owned, always has been. You have zero authority here." She raised her clipboard like it was a holy book. "We had a vote. The HOA board agreed to extend our oversight to include marina access. It's in the new bylaw draft. You can't just vote to take over property you don't own." Brenda narrowed her eyes. "You'll be fined daily until you comply," I laughed. "You go ahead and try." That night I got the email. A fine for unauthorized boating after HOA approved hours. $800. I nearly spit out my drink. She really thought she could pull this off. The next morning I stopped by the marina office. It was owned by an older couple who'd been talking about retiring for years. We'd had beers together plenty of times. They liked me, trusted me. "I'm serious," I told them. "If you're still thinking about selling, I'll buy full asking price today." They blinked. "You want the whole marina? Every dock, every slip, every square inch. And I'll keep the staff if they want to stay. But I'm done letting Brenda Langford act like she owns the coast." By the end of the week, the paperwork was signed. I owned the entire marina. The next Saturday, I installed a new gate at the parking entrance, upgraded the security cameras, and changed the lock system on the dock walkthroughs. Only registered boaters and their guests would have access. HOA board, not on the list. That afternoon, Brenda strutted up to the entrance, clipboard in hand, sunglasses perched on her nose like she was about to interrogate a war criminal. She typed the gate code in the old one. "Access denied." She tried it again, then again. Her face turned redder by the second. I stepped out from my boat, leaned on the railing, and called out, "Hey Brenda, looking for something?" Her head snapped toward me. "Why can't I get in?" "Private property," I said. "You'll need to request access through the new marina management." "And who exactly is that?" I raised my beer. "You're looking at him." Her jaw fell open. You bought the marina?" "Sure did. And good news, the new policy is no HOA interference. Ever." She stormed off yelling something about illegal acquisitions and lawsuits, but I was already walking back to my boat. Let her try. I had all the paperwork. The marina was mine, and Brenda Langford had just lost her biggest playground. The following Monday, I was in the marina office reviewing maintenance logs when the dock attendant popped his head in. "Hey, Ellis, you might want to see this." I followed him outside. Parked right in front of the new gate was a delivery truck engine running, driver looking annoyed. Behind him stood Brenda and 2 HOA board members waving around a stack of papers. One of them had brought a step ladder and was trying to strap a wooden sign to the marina fence. I walked up slowly. Brenda spun around. "This is a formal notice of compliance. The HOA has passed a resolution to designate this marina as a shared community resource. Under municipal code, you are required to accommodate the board's oversight." I eyed the papers. "Is that so?" "It is," she said, thrusting them toward me. "As of this morning, the board has authorized signage to reflect the updated designation." The guy on the ladder dropped a drill. It bounced across the pavement and nearly hit the delivery truck's tire. I folded my arms. "You're trespassing, and you're tampering with private property." Brenda's voice rose. "This marina directly impacts the value and tranquility of our neighborhood. That gives us legal grounds to enforce standards." "No, it doesn't," I said flatly. "You can't just slap a sign on something and pretend you own it. The delivery driver leaned out his window. "Are y'all gonna let me drop this package or not?" I nodded toward the Marina office. "Pull around back." "Sorry about the circus." Brenda tried to follow the truck through the gate, but the passcode panel blinked red. I stepped in front of her. "Touch that keypad again and the police get involved." She narrowed her eyes. "You wouldn't dare. Try me." She backed off, but not before snapping photos of the keypad, the fence, and me. By Wednesday, it escalated. I got a letter from a law firm representing the HOA. It was written on glossy letterhead with an embossed seal, but the contents were laughable claims that my recent purchase had destabilized community expectations, and that my refusal to comply with reasonable oversight was grounds for civil action. I made 3 quick calls. First, to my attorney. Second, to the city planning office. And third, to an old friend of mine who happened to work in the county recorder's office. By Friday, I had a response package drafted, notarized, and hand-delivered to the HOA's law office. It included the full deed history of the Marina, zoning maps showing the clear boundary between my property and the HOA's jurisdiction, and a certified letter from the city stating that no municipal code supported their claim. That should have been the end of it. But Brenda doesn't know how to back off. Late Saturday night, I got a text from the dock attendant. He'd noticed someone cutting through the shrubs along the south fence line. I pulled up the security feed from my phone. There they were. 2 board members in matching polos, ducking under the chain link section near the loading area, one of them wielding bolt cutters. I didn't hesitate. I called the sheriff. By the time I got there, blue and red lights were flashing across the water, and the 2 trespassers were sitting on the curb with their hands cuffed behind their backs. The deputy looked up as I approached. "They said they were conducting an inspection." "Did they show you credentials?" he snorted. "They showed me a clipboard and a printed map with their neighborhood circled in yellow highlighter." "That's not how inspections work." Brenda showed up 10 minutes later in a bathrobe and slippers, trying to sweet-talk the officers. I stayed silent and let her dig herself deeper. "They were acting under board authority," she said, huffing. "This is an overreach." The deputy turned toward her. "Ma'am, they cut a hole in a fence on private property. That's felony trespassing and destruction of property. You can't vote your way around criminal law." She turned red, not angry this time, but panicked. Her eyes darted between the officers and me like she was calculating her odds. The next morning, the story exploded. One of the local news stations picked it up. HOA board members arrested for trespassing at private marina. They aired the security footage, including the moment the bolt cutters snapped through the fence. The anchor's tone was somewhere between outrage and amusement. It didn't take long for the community to turn. By Sunday afternoon, I was getting calls from neighbors I'd never even met. One guy, a retired firefighter, dropped off a cooler of smoked brisket and said, "About time someone stood up to them." Another couple invited me to their backyard BBQ just to thank me, but it wasn't just porch gestures. People started digging. Turns out, Brenda had been funneling HOA funds into Shell Consulting accounts, one of which was registered to her cousin in Nevada. The treasurer, who'd always seemed nervous in meetings, finally cracked and leaked internal emails to the state's HOA regulatory board. I forwarded the evidence to the sheriff's office and my attorney. The next week, I sat in the county courthouse as a judge reviewed the preliminary charges: fraud, criminal trespass, and misuse of HOA funds. Brenda stood in front of the bench, arms crossed, lips pursed, while the prosecutor read off the list. When the judge ordered a full financial audit and temporarily suspended the entire board, she didn't say a word. Just stared straight ahead like she was trying to will herself invisible. Outside the courthouse, a reporter shoved a mic in my face. "Mr. Ellis, what do you think this means for the HOA moving forward?" I looked past the camera, toward the courthouse steps where Brenda had just been escorted into a waiting cruiser. "I think it means it's time for some new leadership around here." Back at the marina, the sun was just starting to dip behind the waterline. A light breeze rustled the flags. The dock was peaceful, no shouting, no clipboards, no bogus signs. I leaned against the railing and watched the boats rocking gently in their slips, the way they were meant to. For the first time in weeks, the water felt calm again. The Monday after the courthouse hearing, I was in the Marina office finishing paperwork with my attorney when an unfamiliar folder was slipped under the glass door. It wasn't labeled, just a plain manila envelope with a green paperclip and no return address. My attorney picked it up, flipped it open, and immediately stiffened. "You're going to want to see this." Inside were printouts, dozens of them, emails, transaction records, and scanned invoices. But these weren't the same files we'd submitted to the sheriff's office. These were deeper, older. And they pointed to something far worse than misappropriated HOA funds. One email caught my eye. It was dated over a year ago, from Brenda to a man named Russ Hargrove. The subject line read, "Dockside Development Scheme." Attached was a scanned document labeled Phase 1, Acquisition Strategy. The contents were a blueprint for a private condo expansion that included leveling the marina completely and replacing it with luxury waterfront units. My Marina. I scanned the document again. The plan had been drafted before I even moved into the neighborhood. "She was trying to force you out," my attorney said. "The fines, the phony bylaws, it was all designed to pressure you or whoever owned this place into selling." My stomach turned. This wasn't just about control. It was about demolition and profit. I turned to the transaction logs. There were wire transfers between the HOA's operating account and a company called Shoreline Consulting. We'd already suspected it was a front, but these new files showed that Shoreline had been paying planning fees to a private architectural firm in Charleston. I called a contact I had in the city's zoning office. An hour later, I had confirmation. Shoreline had submitted a request to rezone the marina property 2 months ago before my purchase had gone through. The request had been denied due to lack of ownership, but the intent was clear. If I hadn't bought it when I did, the demolition permits would have come next. By sunset, I was back at the sheriff's office delivering the packet in person. The deputies took one look at the documents and called in a detective. This was no longer about trespassing or petty fraud. This was conspiracy to commit real estate fraud, and it crossed into federal territory. 2 days later, a black SUV with government plates rolled into the HOA's office parking lot. Men in suits walked out with boxes. The treasurer was escorted from the premises. Brenda's house, once a shrine to seasonal wreaths and lawn flamingos, was now marked by a federal seizure notice taped to the door. Still, the damage from their scheme ran deeper than I thought. A Marina employee I'd just recently hired, Jules, approached me that evening. She'd been sorting through the old filing cabinets when she found something odd, a stack of eviction notices with blank names and dates. All of them were pre-signed by a former HOA secretary. They were ready to evict anyone who pushed back, Jules said. All they needed was an excuse. The deeper we dug, the more we found. They tried to bully 3 other families into selling homes near the shoreline. One elderly couple had been hit with daily noise complaints for having a wind chime on their porch. Another had their mailbox reported as non-uniform 6 times in 1 week. I made some calls, gathered affidavits. By the weekend, I'd organized a community meeting at the Marina neutral ground, no HOA authority. Nearly 60 people showed up. I stood in front of the crowd with a projector screen and laid out everything. The development plan, the shell companies, the false fines, the forced pressure campaigns. I played audio clips from 2 residents who'd recorded board members threatening them with special assessments if they didn't support upcoming votes. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the crowd. People who had once been too nervous to speak were now raising their hands. One man stood up and said, "They told me if I didn't vote for the landscaping expansion, my boat slip would get reassigned. I thought they were bluffing." "They weren't," I said. They were prepping the land for demolition. The landscaping wasn't for aesthetics, it was to mark utility lines for rerouting. That night, we formed a neighborhood action group. Volunteers signed up to testify. Others offered to help with legal filings. We drafted a petition to dissolve the current HOA leadership entirely and submit it to the State Oversight Committee. In the following days, the Sheriff's Department executed a search warrant on a storage unit registered under Brenda's cousin's name. Inside, they found boxes of HOA records dating back 10 years, many of them altered or missing key signatures. Several checks were made out to board members for consulting fees that had never been disclosed. The local paper ran a front-page story: HOA leaders under investigation for racketeering and fraud. The picture showed Brenda in sunglasses being led into a courthouse, her mouth tight with fury. But what shook the neighborhood even more was the revelation that this wasn't just one rogue board. There was a network. Other HOAs in nearby neighborhoods had used the same consulting firm Shoreline. At least 2 had also filed rezoning requests. The State Attorney General's office opened a task force. Meanwhile, I kept the Marina running. We added solar-powered dock lights, repainted the boathouse, and started hosting Friday night cookouts on the pier. The community needed normalcy, and I was more than happy to provide it. A week later, I received a formal invitation from the interim HOA committee to attend their emergency election meeting. I didn't plan to run, I had enough on my plate, but I wanted to be there to make sure the right people were finally stepping up. At the meeting, the atmosphere had completely changed. Gone were the power plays and high and mighty speeches. Instead, residents spoke from the floor, volunteers tallied votes openly, and the new president, a former teacher named Carla, opened her remarks with one simple line: "We're here to rebuild trust, not authority." After the meeting, she approached me. "I know you didn't want to run, but would you consider being our liaison to the Marina?" I considered it. "Only if you promise never to tell me when I can take my boat out," she laughed. "Deal." As I walked back to the docks, I passed a group of teenagers fishing off the edge, their bikes leaned against the railing. One of them looked up and nodded. "Place looks better than it used to," I nodded back. "That's the idea." The wind was picking up, the tide rolling in slow and steady. For the first time in a long while, the waterfront felt like it belonged to the people who cared about it, not the ones who tried to sell it out from under them. And I had no intention of letting that change. 3 weeks after the emergency election, I was dragging a cooler full of ice up the dock ramp when Carla flagged me down near the Marina gate. She was wearing a windbreaker and holding a sealed envelope. "They found something," she said, handing it to me. State audit team uncovered an unfiled annexation motion from 2 years ago. It lists the Marina as pre-approved for community integration, but the signatures are odd. I opened the envelope. Inside were photocopies of the motion, supposedly signed by residents I actually knew, people who would have never agreed to hand over waterfront property to an unelected board. I recognized one name immediately: Henry Alvarez, a veteran who'd passed away the year before. I looked up. "Henry's been dead since last spring," Carla nodded. "Exactly, and 2 others claimed they never signed anything. The motion was never filed with the clerk's office, it was just kept in Brenda's personal files." "They were faking votes," I said. "They were building a paper trail in case someone challenged their authority later," she replied. "Makes you wonder what else they were drawing up in advance." The audit team, now working with the state's white-collar crime division, issued a subpoena for all HOA meeting records from the past 5 years. What they uncovered made the earlier fraud look like amateur hour. A concealed fund labeled Community Wellness Reserve had been used to pay out over $80,000 in consulting stipends. The majority of those payments went to a company called Larkhill Solutions, which after a quick search turned out to be a dissolved LLC revived just long enough to funnel money into a private account under Brenda's maiden name. And that wasn't the worst of it. One of the records, tagged as emergency response planning, included a map with highlighted properties marked for strategic acquisition. Most were homes owned by elderly residents, widows, or people with long-term medical conditions. They'd been targeted for enforcement letters, code violations, and in one case, a lien threat over a cracked garden wall. The state attorney general's office opened a formal investigation into predatory governance and financial abuse of vulnerable homeowners. It was no longer just about HOA corruption. It was a criminal conspiracy to systematically displace residents for future development leverage. On a rainy Tuesday morning, 2 unmarked sedans pulled into the HOA's administrative building. Plainclothes investigators exited with warrants. Computers, filing cabinets, and even the office's internal server were confiscated. The receptionist, who'd only been there 2 months, broke down in tears when she realized the documents she'd been asked to copy were part of the fraudulent annexation plan. I got the call later that afternoon. "Brenda's been indicted," Carla said. "Mail fraud, wire fraud, falsifying public documents, and conspiracy to commit displacement." I walked to the far end of the dock and stared out at the water. It was overcast, the tide flat and unmoving. For the first time in a long time, my phone was quiet. 2 days later, I was summoned to a civil hearing regarding the Marina's status. The state wanted to make absolutely sure that no pending claims or legal loopholes could be used to try and take it again. The judge, a sharp-eyed woman with no tolerance for nonsense, looked over the documentation I brought. I handed her the original deed, the denied rezoning request, and the notarized affidavit from the previous owners confirming there had never been any agreement to transfer oversight to a homeowners association. She flipped through the pages, then looked up. "Mr. Ellis, I'm going to make this plain. You own this marina outright and free of encumbrance. Any attempt to assert jurisdiction over it going forward will be considered a violation of property rights and subject to immediate injunction." "Understood, Your Honor," I said. She gave me one last look. "You handled this with remarkable composure." I didn't say anything. I just nodded. The ruling made the news again. This time the headline was less dramatic. "Court confirms waterfront marina is private property, HOA overreach unfounded." But the message was clear. The board's era of unchecked authority was finished. Not long after, the interim HOA committee voted unanimously to implement transparency measures moving forward. All meetings would be recorded and posted. No bylaw could be passed without full resident review. And any enforcement actions would require 2 independent sign-offs and a certified notice period. They even invited a municipal ombudsman to serve as an external observer for the first year. But the community wasn't just waiting around for reform. A group of residents formed a neighborhood watch not for patrolling, but to keep an eye on the administration itself. They called it the Ledger Group. Every invoice, every meeting, every expenditure went through them, and something else started to happen. People began taking more pride in the place. Gardens were replanted, porches were repainted. Neighbors who barely waved before were now inviting each other over for weekend breakfasts. The marina became a gathering spot again, not just for boaters, but for families, retirees, and kids who came to fish off the dock or watch the gulls sweep across the water. One afternoon, a man I didn't recognize approached me near the fuel station. He was wearing a county badge clipped to his belt and carrying a folder. "I'm looking for Mr. Ellis," he said. "You found him," I said, wiping my hands. He looked around the marina, then back at me. "The state task force is compiling case studies on governance abuse. Your situation, it's textbook. Would you be willing to sit down for a formal interview?" I agreed. 2 days later, I sat in a conference room with a recorder running as I laid out everything from the first bogus fine to the federal charges. They took notes, asked questions, and promised to use the material to push for legislative reform. A month later, Brenda Langford accepted a plea deal. 10 years probation, mandatory restitution, and a lifetime ban from serving on any residential board or association. Her house was sold under a court-supervised process, and the proceeds were used to repay the HOA's depleted reserve fund. The community voted to rename the Marina Walkway after Henry Alvarez, the veteran whose forged signature helped unravel the entire scheme. We held the dedication on a clear Saturday morning. A few dozen neighbors gathered while Henry's daughter cut the ribbon. She looked out toward the water and said, "He would have loved this." I stayed behind after everyone left, sitting on a bench near the boat ramp, watching the reflection of the flag ripple across the surface. The air smelled like salt, diesel, and fresh cut grass. Everything had changed, but in the best way. The marina was no longer just a place to dock boats. It was the heart of a neighborhood that had finally found its voice. And no one, not Brenda, not any future board, not a single self-important clipboard would ever silence it again.